What is the strangest mystery that is still unsolved? There were a few that bugged me. The Sodder children. Their house burned down in the middle of the night. Several of the kids were presumed dead, but their bodies were never found in the debris, and it never burned hot enough to cremate them. It started to look extremely suspicious, and the parents, until their deaths, believed that they had been taken for some reason. Many years down the line, they did receive a photo and cryptic note from someone claiming to be their son, but it was never authenticated. The boy in the box. A deceased little boy, found beaten, recently shaved of his hair and abandoned in a box for a bassinet that he was way too old for. The photos and reconstructions of him released to the public in the desperate hope of identifying him are haunting. The St. Louis Jane Doe. A little girl found in an abandoned house, decapitated and bound at the hands. They have no dental records or facial reconstruction to go from. The case has led nowhere. She's just nameless, lost to time. Tri-State Crematory. A devastating case of a man called back from his college football career to take over his father's business when the father fell ill. Over time, people started noticing bodies and body parts on the grounds, just hanging around. When someone finally took the reports seriously, they found that he'd been piling bodies up randomly all over the property, often when it would have been much easier to cremate them instead of hauling them around to where they were dumped. The guy gave families canisters of cement dust instead of ashes. The mystery on this one is why? The guy never gave up the answer to what happened there, and will only insist that there are no answers. His lawyer theorized he had mercury poisoning from cremating amalgam fillings, but that doesn't really explain why you would dump a body instead of cremating it when the latter takes less effort. The West Memphis 3 case. All of the satanic panic mess obscured so much that will probably go unanswered now. A bloody man covered in mud stumbles into a Bojangles the night those little boys went missing. Cops barely investigated that incident and lost the blood evidence they did collect regarding it. What was going on with John Mark Byers and Terry Hobbs? 2 dads of 2 of those kids, both turning up with evidence and acting at different points like they may have been involved. Lars Matenk, a German tourist on vacation in Bulgaria. He got into a fight, and the medical complications kept him from going home on a flight with his friends. Staying behind, it looks like his mental state unraveled completely over the course of a few days, increasing paranoia, eventually culminating in his complete disappearance into a field of sunflowers. On April 19, 1995, a truck bomb detonated outside the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. The explosion killed 168 in what was the deadliest terrorist attack on the United States until 9/11 to date. It still remains the deadliest act of domestic terrorism in the country. One of the lesser-known things about this case is the case of the missing leg. Investigators discovered the leg laying among the rubble and identified it belonging to Lakeisha Levy. The only problem was she'd already been buried with both her legs. She was exhumed. Her severed leg was placed in her coffin, while the other leg was taken to the FBI laboratory for identification. Since it had been embalmed, a DNA sample was unable to be obtained. The extra left leg, which had been mistakenly buried with Levy, is suspected to belong to an unidentified 169th victim, whose body had mostly disintegrated in the blast. This has led people to suspect there was an additional terrorist involved, even though perpetrators Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols had been convicted, with 2 others later identified as accomplices. So who was the possible additional bomber? They still remain unidentified now, 25 years after the attack. The Tamam Shud case, also known as the mystery of the Somerton Man, is an unsolved case of an unidentified man found dead at 6:30 a.m. 1 December 1948 on the Somerton Park Beach just south of Adelaide, South Australia. The case is named after the Persian phrase tamam shud, meaning ended or finished, which was printed on a scrap of paper found months later in the fob pocket of the man's trousers. The scrap had been torn from the final page of a copy of Rubaiyat by Omar Khayyam, authored by 12th century poet Omar Khayyam. Tamam was misspelt as Taman in many early reports, and this error has often been repeated, leading to confusion about the name in the media. Who was Perseus? From 1943 to 1946, the Soviet Union had a high-level spy in the Manhattan Project, codenamed Perseus. This spy was a scientist at the White Sands Missile Testing Site in New Mexico and the main research facility in Los Alamos. Perseus saw pretty much the entire project start to finish, giving the Russians everything they needed to get to work on their own bomb. The fact that they were able to do so within 4 years of the end of World War II, when their nation was still devastated, is proof positive that Perseus helped a great deal. And to top it all off, Perseus was never caught or positively identified. What on earth happened to the Trump family? So it's this Australian family who owned a berry farm. Somehow, Mr. and Mrs. Trump and their 3 grown kids developed the belief that they weren't safe and they needed to flee their farm without cell phones or anything traceable, credit cards, etc. It sounds like the oldest son wasn't sold on whatever it was that led them to flee. He brought his phone, but eventually it got tossed from the car. He ended up bailing first and taking a train home. From there, the rest of the family slowly separated and suffered various degrees of emotional breaks. The 2 girls stole a car. Somehow they got separated and one made it home, but the other was found on the floor in the back seat of some guy's car in a catatonic state. He spotted her after he started down the road. Eventually, the parents were found wandering around aimlessly. Fortunately, they were all okay physically, but WTF happened. Was someone actually after them? Were they delusional? As far as I know, the family hasn't released any updates. Literally any dig site in archaeology, even the ones that are just garbage and potsherds, are fascinating if you really try to picture the people behind them, what they thought and felt. Actually, garbage probably tells you more about a people than anything else, really. Archaeology major. But my favorite is Chauvet Cave. If you have a chance, watch Werner Herzog's documentary Cave of Forgotten Dreams. I think it's still on Netflix. It has some of the most stunning cave art in the world, which almost certainly had some kind of profound significance, and we don't and will likely never know what it is. Moreover, there's evidence that the cave was abandoned for thousands of years and later returned to, only for the returnees to continue to make paintings in the exact same style and possibly for the exact same reasons. There is so much to be seen in these figures. There's a portrait of an animal tossing its head back that looks like one of the world's earliest explorations of stop motion or sequential art. When I look at it, I can feel the will of the painter, who wanted so much to convey this sort of motion. There are also the footprints of a boy who arrived much later to the cave than its original users, whose marks appear to be contemporary with the paw prints of a wolf. It's hard to say now, according to Cave of Forgotten Dreams, whether they walked together, whether they walked 20 years apart, whether they were friends, or whether the wolf was stalking the boy. But I read a blog post by a professional hunter and tracker who looked at the footage of the prints from the film and said that they likely walked together. I wonder what they were thinking. If the boy had some knowledge of what he would find there, or if he was simply exploring a cave and found some of the greatest art in human history. In Chauvet, there is also the solution to a mystery. Until the discovery of Chauvet Cave, paleontologists were unsure as to whether cave lions had manes. On the cave walls, there is an illustration of a cave lion with visible testicles and no mane, settling the debate. The Kongala Pass in Ladakh. This region lies in the disputed border of India and China and is truly the most inaccessible places in the world. In 1962, the armies of both the countries were engaged in a severe conflict. After this, both China and India entered into an agreement according to which none will be allowed to patrol the region, but can keep an eye on it from a distance. After this, a popular belief floated that the Kongala Pass in Ladakh is a hideous base of UFOs. The area has forever remained a no man's land due to its territorial limits, and is the reason why the UFOs have chosen it as their operational base. Reportedly, many have seen these UFOs, and both the Indian and Chinese governments are aware of these developments. In 2006, Google Maps too baffled the world with some images that looked like military facilities. But to date, the whole issue remains mysterious and unexplainable. The toxic death of Gloria Ramirez. 23 people became ill due to her mere presence, and 5 were hospitalized. We've never worked out what happened. There's an episode of the Stuff You Should Know podcast that talks about it. About 8:15 p.m., on the evening of February 19, 1994, Ramirez, suffering from severe heart palpitations, was brought into the emergency department of Riverside General Hospital by paramedics. She was extremely confused and was suffering from tachycardia and Shane-Stokes respiration. The medical staff injected her with diazepam, midazolam, and lorazepam to sedate her. When it became clear that Ramirez was responding poorly to treatment, the staff tried to defibrillate her heart. At that point, several people saw an oily sheen covering Ramirez's body, and some noticed a fruity, garlic-like odor that they thought was coming from her mouth. A registered nurse named Susan Kane attempted to draw blood from Ramirez's arm and noticed an ammonia-like smell coming from the tube. She passed the syringe to Julie Gorchinsky, a medical resident, who noticed manila-colored particles floating in the blood. At this point, Kane fainted and was removed from the room. Shortly thereafter, Gorchinsky began to feel nauseated. Complaining that she was lightheaded, she left the trauma room and sat at a nurse's desk. A staff member asked her if she was okay, but before she could respond, she also fainted. Maureen Welch, a respiratory therapist who was assisting in the trauma room, was the third to pass out. The staff was then ordered to evacuate all emergency department patients to the parking lot outside the hospital. Overall, 23 people became ill and 5 were hospitalized. A skeleton crew stayed between and behind to stabilize Ramirez. At 8:50 p.m., after 45 minutes of CPR and defibrillation, Ramirez was pronounced dead from kidney failure related to her cancer. The Winchester Mystery House. I watched a documentary on this house when I was 10, and it has stuck with me ever since. It's about a woman named Sarah Winchester. Her husband and baby both died. Her husband owned a rifle company, and she went to a psychic. The psychic told her that she is being haunted by the ghosts of all the people who have died by the hands of those guns, and that is the reason for the tragedy that happened in her life. To appease the spirits, the psychic told her to build a great house for them, and she was not allowed to stop building or tragedy will strike again. She didn't get help from anyone, but she did it and kept building for the next 38 years. There are stairs that lead to nowhere, windows that don't look out, hallways that wrapped around. It has 161 rooms, and it's huge. Was it really the ghosts? Was she insane? I have no idea, but it's the most interesting story I've ever heard. Ball lightning is accepted as a real phenomenon, but is largely a mystery. I first became fascinated with ball lightning as a kid after my grandpa freaked out when a ball of light came in through our back door and followed him to the living room, then disappeared. He told that story again and again until he passed. I was a big fan of the Little House on the Prairie series at the time, and his description sounded similar to what I read. A few years later, my mom was taking a meteorology class, and that reignited my interest in the weather, especially lightning. I loved having her teach me all the stuff she was learning, and we'd watch her required documentaries together. Fast forward to middle school, when we finally got a computer, and my interest flared back up. That was about the first time I ran into the concept of ball lightning, and it reminded me of when I was a kid. My mom confirmed my memory of my grandpa's story, and even how eager I was to read him the passages from the book. I check in time to time to see what new breakthroughs have been made in the area, but it's still really sparse, even today.